Hello, everyone, and thank you to the New York District Export Council for putting this great event together, despite the pandemic, and thank you for inviting me to be the keynote speaker for your 2021 Empowering Women Leadership event. I am thrilled to join the incredible women gathered here today and to participate in this event, which combines some of my strongest interests in Congress: advancing women's opportunities, strengthening our economy, and defending our financial system and national security. I've always been a strong advocate for women, and I've been trying to remove barriers that women face since the day I first came to Congress in 1993. When I saw how few women were serving on corporate boards, I introduced the Diversity in Corporate Leadership Act, which recently passed out of the Financial Services Committee earlier this month as part of my good friend and colleague, Representative Gregory Meek's legislation, the Corporate Governance Through Diversity Act. Back in 2015, I asked the Government Accountability Office to look at the gender makeup of corporate boards, and the results made it clear that we had to take action. The GAO found that even if we assume that if women began joining boards at a rate equal to men, it would take more than 40 years for there to be an equality in representation. That is completely unacceptable. Women make up roughly 47% of the workforce, and yet they only hold roughly 29% of board seats at the Fortune 500 companies. Something needs to change, and just so we're clear, increasing diversity on corporate boards is not just the right thing to do, it's good business too. Study after study has shown that companies with greater gender, racial, and ethnic diversity on their boards perform better financially. McKinsey found that companies with the highest racial diversity on their boards were 33% more likely to have above-average profitability. A study by Credit Suisse found that companies with at least one woman on the board, just one, outperformed competitors by 3.5% per year for the last decade. With this data, investors want companies they invest in to increase the diversity of their boards. My legislation with Congressman Meeks puts that power in investors by requiring public companies to report the racial, ethnic, and gender composition of their boards and executive officers in their annual proxy statement. And by putting this information in one place for investors, without requiring them to go look at pictures of board members or guests, the gender, race, or ethnicity of a board member based on their names, the bill would help investors to quickly sort the companies that do and do not have diverse boards, enabling to invest in the companies who share their values. The legislation would also establish a diversity action advisory group at the SEC, which would study strategies to increase gender, racial, and ethnic diversity on corporate boards. Making meaningful progress on board diversity is going to require a range of different policies in addition to the improved disclosures in this legislation. And representation matters, not just in meetings and boardrooms, but also on the public stage. As we work to encourage more women to join the financial and other industries that have typically been dominated by men, we can inspire them by showing those who came before. Over the last decade, I've been working to pass a bill creating a national museum dedicated to telling the story of American women. And finally, in December, it became law. What an incredible feat it will be to have an entire museum, and the first one in the country anywhere, dedicated to the achievements and contributions of women in our country. It's way past time for this, and I'm proud we managed to get it through Congress, even in such difficult times. I firmly believe that if you see it, you can be it. And as we talk about representation and equality, there's nothing more fundamental to fixing gender inequality in this country than finally changing the U.S. Constitution, our most foundational document, by making the Equal Rights Amendment, or ERA, the 28th Amendment. It will impact every single man, woman, and child in this country by providing permanent protection against discrimination on the basis of sex. Women's rights should not be dependent on who controls legislatures, the White House, or the courts. It must be solidified in our Constitution. One of the persistent ways women are still discriminated against today is unequal pay. March 24th was Equal Pay Day, the day which represents the extra months women must work to be paid what men were in the previous year. The wage gap is a disgrace and should not exist in our country. This past Equal Pay Day, as chair of the House Committee on Oversight and Reform, I held a hearing examining the pay gap and its effects on women with U.S. women's national team soccer star Megan Rapinoe. She testified about how women's soccer players make just 38 cents to the dollar paid to the men's team, even though the women are world champions and won the last 2 World Cups, which the men did not. If women like Megan Rapinoe, who are at the top of their game, can be paid so little, imagine how much worse it is for women who have a smaller platform and fewer advantages. And of course, we cannot talk about the future of our financial system without an eye on national security. That is why I fought for over a decade to pass the Corporate Transparency, a transformative anti-money laundering and anti-corruption bill that will crack down on bad actors who seek to exploit loopholes in our financial system. This bill cracks down on anonymous shell companies, which have become the vehicle of choice for terrorist financing, money laundering, and organized crime. Without this legislation, the U.S. became one of the easiest places in the world to set up anonymous shell companies because no state currently requires companies to disclose their true beneficial owners. When a terrorist cell wants to move their money or a criminal syndicate wants to launder money, they can do it right here in the U.S. It's why you didn't see any Americans exposed in the Panama Papers. They didn't need to go to Panama. They can do it right here in America. The same terrorist groups that want to attack the U.S. are also using our own financial system to finance those attacks. It's appalling, and it has to end. These anonymous shell companies are also know how kleptocrats and criminals have been parking their money in luxury real estate in my district in New York and elsewhere. If you drive through New York City at night, you'll see that entire buildings have no lights on because no one actually lives in these apartments. They were purchased purely to hide money and to act as a bank account. And when kleptocrats and criminals pour their money into real estate in New York, that limits the availability of housing and drives up housing costs for ordinary Americans. So not only will my bill make our country safer, but it will also lower housing costs for New Yorkers. And that's why I'm so proud that this bill was finally signed into law just a few months ago. My bill will make it harder for terrorists, criminals, and kleptocrats to finance their illegal operations and move their money. And this will ultimately make the U.S. and the world a safer place. I want to close by acknowledging all of the incredible women here again for their incredible achievements and for paving the way for future generations of women to follow in our footsteps. Thank you again to the New York District Export Council for putting together this important event and for having me. It was my honor to join you today. Thank you.